Okay, for those of you joining us on the recorded session, welcome to week 3 Montana Government Studies Seminar, coming to you live from my classroom on the ice planet Hoth. Please hand me that tauntaun. I need to get warm. Ooh, before I do that, I need to hit share screen and do that. All right, and away we go. And as usual, if you have questions as we go through this, please unmute yourself and ask. I will look at the chat periodically, but it's not something I, am glued to. So just be aware of that. There we go. Come on, move. Sorry, moving the... And feel free to, if you have a camera on your laptop, which I discovered on the first session, a lot of folks don't. But if you have a camera, feel free to, have your camera on. And so I can, kind of see you a little bit. It's nice to not feel like I'm talking into a void. So announcements for this week. Don't forget that this is your last week on the Unit 1 reading guide. It is due tomorrow. That is the 12th. And last call on the 17th. Keep in mind, you have that 5-day grace. And I think I've said this before. I will say it again and again. Don't live in that grace period. Do not treat the 17th as your deadline. Don't, because then if something happens and you can't get it turned in by 8 p.m. on the 17th, you have nowhere else to go. You have no fallback. And I will not grant you additional time beyond those 5 days that I'm already granting you. I just do not do it. I mean, it has to be bleeding from the eyes, long-term hospitalization kind of thing for me to even consider granting you additional time after those 5 days. So don't do that to yourself. Get it turned in tomorrow. And that way, if something comes up and you don't get it turned in till Saturday, you're good. You don't need to email me. You don't need to text me. You don't need to call me and beg and plead. Please, can I have more time, Mr. Rosenleaf? I'm going to say, you have the grace period. Do it. But, getting a hold of me on Wednesday and saying, oh, I work until 8:30. Can I turn it in at 9? No, you can't. 8 o'clock is the deadline. So get her done. Get it figured out. Don't forget to do the discussion forums. A lot of folks, especially in the Montana classes, did not do the discussion forum last week, and that hurt grades tremendously. Especially right now, as we do not have a bunch of points in the grade book. 15 points really means a lot. But bear in mind that in the grand scheme of things, 15 points isn't going to mean a bunch. Once we have projects going in and tests and whatnot, 15 points isn't going to be a huge thing, but they do add up. So don't get into the habit of, I'll just won't do the forum this week. Do that enough and your grade will suffer for it. So don't get into that bad habit. Do it every week. You could get it done early in the week, and then all you have to do is kind of look in on it, make sure that nobody had any questions on what you posted. Easy peasy, guys. Don't forget to please join the Remind. It makes all of our lives ever so much easier if you get the Remind. That's, if Moodle goes down or something like that, I send out a message about it. That way I don't end up getting 19 emails. Hey, Moodle's down. Yeah, we know that. If you were on the Remind, you would know that Moodle's down. Anything that I have to get out to you quickly, that's where I put it. And that way, too, if you have a specific question for me that only applies to you, you can contact me on Remind. You're welcome to email me, too, but I can also get a hold of you if there's an issue. Right now, my most direct means of contact is some of you have cell phones listed in Power School. And I text you, and a lot of you don't text me back. And so I have no idea if you got the message, if you're working on things, or, I think sometimes the numbers are wrong. Sometimes you just don't respond. And then that's when I have to start calling parents. And I don't want to have to call your parents. I would rather deal directly with you. Don't forget the ongoing projects. Current event number 1 is due next Friday. This should take you absolutely positively no longer than an hour. And that's if you're a very methodical reader and writer. If you're an average reader and writer, this would probably take you closer to half an hour. Okay, one article on a Montana topic. That's pretty wide open. I would ask, please no sports, and not just, so and so was pulled over for speeding. Please don't take it out of the police blotter unless it's a really notable case. But right now the legislature is in session. There are tons of articles about Montana government topics. Pick one. It can be from a newspaper. It can be from an online news source like a TV station. I would ask, not like an opinion type blog, but if it's a reputable news blog, sure, fine, go to town. You summarize, you give me your opinion, and you provide me most likely the link. If you're taking it straight out of a printed newspaper, try to scan it or take a picture of it, just so I can look at what your source was. But yeah, for most of you, it'll just be a link. So give me the link, summary, and your opinion, and that's it. Points. Yay! Right? The map project is not due until next month, but chip away on it. Don't leave it till the last minute. Do a good job. I'm giving you a big chunk of time so that you can do a good job on it. Don't slop it together at the last minute. I give you time so that you can do a good job. Don't forget the seminar work. A lot of folks did not do one or both pieces of the seminar assignments last week. Remember, you need to do the week 3 CNN 10 news quiz and the week 3 seminar journal. I've had people contact me, I had such and such come up last week. Will you reopen that? No, I won't. I don't reopen forums. I don't reopen seminar work, period. You have the time that you have, so make sure you're checking in every day. If you feel that you have a decent reason why maybe you should be excused from those points, contact me. We'll discuss it. But I don't reopen forums because then it wouldn't be a discussion. I don't reopen seminar work because trying to grade it late is a nightmare headache for me. So yeah. And test next week. It will open Monday. And that's even though Monday is a holiday. I'm just going to open it Monday. Do you have to log in Monday? No. But if you want to, it's there. It'll be there Monday. It will be due Friday the 19th with a last call of the 24th. Again, don't live in that grace period because we're moving on. That following Monday, new work's coming up. So if you keep, turning in stuff late, then you're late getting started on the next batch of stuff. Then you're late turning that in. You're late getting started on the test, and it just on and on and on, and you're late. And eventually it's going to bite you in the butt. So don't let that happen to yourself. And finally, just a quick note. I am not one of those teachers that will follow behind you with a broom and dustpan and, Peaches, you need to turn in this assignment now. No, that I do not do that. You are in high school now. And I know I am one of the more strict teachers when it comes to due dates and things like that. That comes from my having taught remote classes for over a decade. And any extra time that I give you, half of you will use up to, I mean, there are a big chunk of you that turn in things at the absolute last minute, no matter when that last minute is. Okay. So setting due dates and holding to them is important, not just for me and my sanity, which is huge, but for you. You need to understand that due dates matter, because when you get out in the real world, due dates matter. And if you don't turn things in on time, let's say you're applying for a grant for your, wherever you're working, some nonprofit or whatever, and you turn that grant proposal in late, guess what? You don't get the grant. Plain and simple. So due dates matter. I give you tons of time to do things if you work diligently on them during the time that I give you. If you wait till the last minute, it becomes a lot harder. Okay? So I will never, follow behind you. You have to want to pass my class at least as much as I want you to pass my class. This is not one of those situations where I'm going to rub gravel through my hair to get you to turn in work. You don't do the work, you don't get the grade. You don't get the grades, you fail the class, and you take it again next year. Plain and simple. I'm not saying this to be mean, I'm saying this to be realistic to you. Okay? Any questions about any of that? And again, if you have questions, please unmute yourself and ask. I do, again, look at the chat, but it's not constant. So, all right, let's jump in. We are talking this week about Lewis and Clark, which, living in Great Falls, you may already know a bunch about. I know that I didn't really get interested in Lewis and Clark until after I went to college, because I grew up in Great Falls is like the center of the Lewis and Clark expedition geographically and in a lot of different ways. So we grow up in this town, you learn a lot about Lewis and Clark just because it's sort of all around us. But this was a very important expedition, and it is worth doing at least a little bit of a deep dive as to what the goals were and what happened. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so this is a lovely map that I pulled off of Wikipedia that shows the route of the expedition. Notice that they start in, what today would be St. Louis, and they are going to basically travel mostly with rivers. They're going to travel up basically the Missouri River for the most part, and they are going to follow the Missouri River basically to where it's created. And you can see that their Great Falls is a big part right there, very much in the center of the expedition. Montana, very much in the center of the expedition. And then they make it all the way to the Pacific. They do at certain points break apart into different groups to cover more territory. But yeah, so that's basically what that looked like. So what were the goals? Why was this expedition happening? So according to Thomas Jefferson, who was president, he was the guy that sent this group out to do this. The number one thing they were looking for was, and I quote, "Find the most direct and practicable water communication," that means route, "across this continent for the purposes of commerce." So we're talking 1804 here. Columbus, remember, landed in the New World. Anybody remember what year? What year did Columbus sail the ocean blue? Anybody?
1942.
Not 1942, 1492. But yeah, you were on the right track. So 1492, we're now in 1804. So we're talking 300 plus years. And people are still looking for what becomes known as the Northwest Passage, the means of getting across this giant honk of land to have commerce between Europe and China and India without having to go around the tip of either Africa or South America, which is a really long trip and really dangerous and not pleasant. So, can you get rid of restricted assignments on Moodle? At some point I will, but not right now. Okay. Yeah. So that was number one thing they were looking for, Northwest Passage. Number two, they were there to declare U.S. sovereignty over the land. Basically, tell the Native American tribes, hey, you know how the French owned this land and basically didn't do anything with it? Well, now you're owned by America. And guess what? We're going to do stuff with it. And then account for natural resources. And really, and what's kind of funny is only really a lesser goal of this was scientific discovery, even though that becomes one of the sort of lasting impacts of this expedition was all of the species and samples and things that they brought back and things that they encountered. That was not even one of the major goals of the expedition. It was sort of tertiary. All right, so they depart May 14th, 1804, about 4 p.m. At the opening of this, they are not under the command of Lewis. They are under the command of Clark. Lewis joins them about 6 days into the voyage. I don't know where Lewis was, but he does not join until about 6 days in. The core of Discovery, as they become known, included as many as 45 people. And only one death. That is remarkable that only one of these guys died. And they died not from being killed by hostile Native American tribes or from exposure to snow and cold, which these guys definitely saw. No, this guy died of acute appendicitis and did so very shortly into the expedition, August 20th, 1804. So only a few months after they departed, Sergeant Charles Floyd will die from acute appendicitis, again, leading people to wonder, why the heck do we even have appendixes? They serve absolutely no function and just get us into trouble. Okay, so one of the big things that will come about from the Lewis and Clark expedition is that the Corps of Discovery will establish relations with at least 24 Native American tribes that up to this point were either not known to the government of the United States or were just barely on the radar screen. So they will establish relations with these tribes. These tribes will help the Corps of Discovery. And honestly, without these tribes, these guys would have died several times over, either from attacks from tribes that were not friends or from wild animals or exposure to winter. Yeah, these guys would have died several times over had it not been for the Native Americans. And so their first winter, they camp, the winter of 1804 to 1805, they make camp. The picture on your screen is a recreation of their camp site for that winter that was known as Fort Mandan, which is amongst or on the land of the Mandan tribe. And it was there that they met the French fur trapper Toussaint Charbonneau. And really more importantly than Charbonneau, because who cares about Charbonneau? Charbonneau's young, read about 14, 15 years old, young Shoshone wife, Sacagawea. And Sacagawea was quite impactful to the Corps of Discovery, unlike Charbonneau, who, yeah, he was a part, but really, the fact that they hired Charbonneau and got Sacagawea for free was quite lucky for them, because without Sacagawea, they certainly would have died, and they would have gotten lost. And yeah, we probably wouldn't be talking about them today, except as cautionary tales. This is a painting by the Western artist Charles Marion Russell, or as you might know him, C.M. Russell. This is Lewis and Clark meeting the Salish in Ross Hole, is the title. All right. So by the time they get to Great Falls, one of the reasons why Great Falls is so important in the Lewis and Clark expedition is it was there that for an extended period of time and length of territory, the crew had to take their boats out of the water in what was called a portage, because they encountered these massive falls like the one that you see in the picture in the lower left side of the screen, that they could not get the boat up. So they had to basically take the boats out of the water and get around this series of falls. And you can see the various ones that are on the map. This map is at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, as is that lovely large diorama there of them getting their boats up and out. But yeah, so this was really the largest place where they had to basically take the boats out and walk and carry these giant boats around these falls, because there are these series of falls that modern residents have put dams on all of these falls to generate hydroelectric power. I'd love to be able to see them the way that Lewis and Clark saw them, because it had to have been spectacular, and they note that in their journals, that it was a spectacularly beautiful and also pretty frightening sight, because they realized they were going to have to do this giant portage that just kind of kept on going. You can see they had to basically walk those boats for lots and lots of miles. These guys were tough, very, very tough. Okay, so what were the accomplishments of this group? Number one, they reached the Pacific Ocean. That was certainly not something that they was a foregone conclusion. There were certain points where they probably could have turned back and nobody would have judged them harshly, but that was their mission, was eventually to reach the Pacific and see what that land was like. They mapped this land, really the first white settlers to map that land. They came back with over 140 maps of this territory. They established relations with at least 24 Native American tribes, and also presented all of them with medals, basically saying, hey, you're now in the United States of America. The fact that the tribes didn't just slit their throats showed a lot of restraint. They did not find the Northwest Passage, but they did find a navigable route between water and land that people could recreate, and it's from that initial voyage that other groups will venture into the West and find other routes and cross the mountains, and that white settlers will start coming west and settling in places like Oregon and Washington and Montana and places like that. And they also will bring back plant and animal species previously unknown to white Americans. They also bring back with them a Native American chief to meet with Thomas Jefferson. And then a smaller group will escort him back at least part of the way to his, I forget which tribe this gentleman was from, but they do bring back one Native American leader to meet with the new great father, Thomas Jefferson. So yeah, that's just a few of the accomplishments. A couple of myths that I came across while doing this research. Myth number one, and this is really highlighted like in this picture, which and you there are tons of these paintings out there. Obviously, there were no photographs of these guys um, out on the trail, but there's this belief that they were dressed in buckskin and all this stuff. That's likely not true. They may have dressed in that way at various times, but mostly these guys were military, and that was that's myth number two. My bad. So myth number one was that Native Americans were not important to the core of discovery or to the settling, quote unquote, of the West, and nothing could be further from the truth. This comes from, in most famously, a work called The Frontier Thesis by Frederick Jackson Turner. And Turner sort of says, the West was settled by rugged individuals, and it doesn't even mention Native Americans. And honestly, again, without tribes like the Sioux, the Arikara, the Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Shoshone, the Nez Perce, the Chinook, and the Clatsop, these guys would have died several times. Again, either by wild animals or starvation or being attacked by tribes that were not very friendly. They certainly would have died. So yeah, the Sioux could have annihilated them quite easily in September of 1804, but they chose not to. The Mandan and the Hidatsa helped them through their first winter. The Shoshone provided horses and soldiers to help them traverse the Rockies. The Nez Perce saved them from starvation after they got through the Bitterroot Mountains. So yeah, all of those tribes, very, very important. And then the one that I thought I was on, myth number two, most artwork depicts them in buckskin and raccoon hats and all these things. These guys were military. They wore military uniforms, maybe not dress uniforms all the time, but certainly what we would think of today as like fatigues. Was what they were dressed in. Most of these guys were military. There were not all that many civilians along that would have dressed in non-military clothing. And these guys primarily wore linen and things like that. They may have supplemented with leather clothing from time to time, but it's unlikely that any of them ever appeared like the paintings like this. You would have never seen them dressed like that. So that's sort of apocryphal. All right, other interesting facts about Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery. Lewis first met Clark after being court-martialed in 1795. So Lewis was sort of a bad boy. He challenged a senior officer to a duel. And I believe the court-martial, he was not convicted, but he was moved to another regiment. And it was there that he met William Clark. Lewis was Jefferson's personal secretary. That's how he got the gig. He was in charge of Jefferson's correspondence for a time. And Jefferson thought, he'd be a good guy. I trust him. Basically, he was loyal to Jefferson. Jefferson thought the Corps would encounter woolly mammoth. They didn't know what was on the frontier and what was on the plains. And they thought, sure, woolly mammoth could still be alive out here. Jefferson really thought they were going to come back either with proof of woolly mammoth or at least having seen woolly mammoth. The Spanish tried to arrest the Corps of Discovery. They sent 4 or 5 parties full of Spanish soldiers to try and arrest these guys, but the territory that they were in was so huge that there was no way that they could find them in a reasonable way. There was one slave along on the trip. That was Clark's personal slave, York. And once they were on the expedition, York was treated as an equal member of the expedition. He was involved. If there was a vote of the Corps of Discovery, he was allowed to vote. And he saved men's lives and did all sorts of things. But then when they came back to the East, Clark expected York to go back to being a slave, and York sort of balked at that. And so Clark ended up selling York because York could never look at Clark the same way again because he had basically been an equal for what amounted to a couple of years. And to go back into slavery was just more than York could handle. So York ended up not being Clark's slave, but not because Clark freed him. Clark sold him. And I believe York died at the hands of a fairly strict master after that. These guys were armed to the teeth. 200 pounds of gunpowder, 400 pounds of lead. I mean, imagine walking with 400 pounds of lead and 200 pounds of gunpowder that, because you needed to be armed because they didn't know what they were going to run into. But I mean, about 400 pounds of lead, that just floors me, to make bullets. And then they also carried with them an experimental air rifle as a weapon, but they primarily used rifles and muskets. Lewis, after the expedition, became quite depressed. And while he was governor of Louisiana, traveling from Washington, D.C. back to Louisiana, it is likely that he committed suicide. There is some disagreement amongst historians that maybe Lewis was murdered, but most historians fairly well believe that Lewis committed suicide. Clark, interestingly enough, the guy that would not set York free afterwards, took a shine to Sacagawea's kids. So one of them was born on the expedition, a son named Jean-Baptiste. And then after the expedition, she gave birth to another child, Tessie, starts with a T, I believe. Anyway, when Sacagawea died in 1812, Clark actually adopted her children. I don't know what happened to Charbonneau. If he died at some point and they had no father, or if he ran off back to France or what. But Charbonneau was obviously not in the picture, and Clark, first he actually provided for Jean-Baptiste's education at a good school in the eastern part, or in the United States. And then when Sacagawea died in 1812, he actually became the legal guardian of both of her children. So kind of interesting how things work out. All right, with that, I will give you your journal topic. What were two of the goals of the Lewis and Clark expedition, and what do you think is important about the expedition that often goes unnoticed? So that is what you put in the week 3 seminar journal. I will also post these slides in PDF form. If you forget the journal topic, you can't do it right now, and you want to go back, you can look at the last page on that document, and that'll be this slide, and you can see what the journal topic is. I had a couple people last week, email me, what's the journal topic? I couldn't tune in, blah, 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 blah. Look at this. I always post it, and I post a video. So, yeah. Any questions about anything we talked about in this session? Okay. If there are no questions, I'm going to let you be free. If you have something you would like to discuss with me, hang out and we will discuss it. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.
Have a nice